All right, I'm going to run down in detail the specifics of my use of what I consider to be probably the best fat burner ever. And I know that there are going to be some people watching this who are going to go, duh. That's been known by a lot of people for a long time, that sort of thing. My thoughts on this compound have changed considerably, basically a complete 180 compared to what I used to think of this compound. The main reason for that isn't necessarily because of the compound itself, but what I consider to be the suicidal way of using it that seemed to go hand in hand with the compound. It's almost like there was no one who was using the compound without a ridiculous dosing protocol that I considered, and still do, to be incredibly dangerous. Some people are willing to take those kinds of risks. I'm not. I thought that the compound and the dosing was just was ridiculous. The dosing protocol is ridiculous. Some people still use those types of dosing protocols. I think it's absolutely asinine. But what has happened recently is the compound has made a resurgence. It's kind of come back into popularity, I guess you could say, with a lower dosing protocol. That's when I took a closer look at it and did some research, a lot of research actually. Spoke with a lot of people that I have a lot of respect for their opinions, and decided that I wanted to experiment with it firsthand. I feel that with the lower dosing protocol that it's nowhere near as dangerous. Obviously you need to know what you're doing. So when I give this information that's to follow, I'm not advocating or condoning the use of this compound. Basically what I'm doing is I am giving you my experience from someone who I feel is, and I hope you do too, that my opinions are well respected, that I am known in the industry as being very cautious and very careful, and that I would not even experiment or play with this compound if I thought that I couldn't manage it relatively easily. I'm also not going to name the compound. You either know what I'm talking about or you don't. I'm not going to be that person that you get information from or somebody else gets information from and says, well, I completely trust Skip. I'm going to go and I'm going to do this. If you know what the compound is and you're comfortable using it and you want to take into consideration my experience based on how it worked for me, what I did, that sort of thing, great. Please do not take the information that follows as me telling you that it is safe in any way, shape, or form. You need to come to those conclusions on your own, and I am simply giving you my experience after using it only 2 times. I've been in this industry, I've been training thousands of people for over 30 years now. There are a lot of things that I know like the back of my hand. This fat burner is not one of those things. I have very limited experience with it, and all I'm doing is passing on my experience, how I used it, how it worked for me, how I felt on it, and what my results were. I ran the compound twice. The first run was 14 days. The second run was 10 days. The second run was supposed to be 14 days, but I will get into the details of why I cut it 4 days short here in just a minute. I'm going to give away everything from my dosing to the supplements that I used to the diet, because the diet is hugely important to take advantage of the lower dosing protocol. The higher dosing protocols, in my opinion, can only be done on a low carb or no carb type of dieting protocol. When I say higher dosing, well, let me refer to my dosing first. I dosed the compound at 250 milligrams of crystalline powder once a day. I do feel that I could have tolerated a higher dose than that based only on body temperature. There were times where I got warm, my temperature was up, it was noticeable, but it was never to the point where it was not tolerable or where I was concerned or anxious or thinking, you know what, my temperature is just too high, my body temperature is too high, I need to cool off. I did sleep with a fan, but I always sleep with a fan, so that was really no different. I'll be honest and say that I expected more heat than there was. I don't know that I was necessarily let down, but at the same time, I anticipated way more heat and maybe being a little bit uncomfortable with that heat at times. And that just didn't happen. So the first run of 14 days, just some notes here to compare and contrast the two cycles that I ran, because I purposely did things differently the second time so that I could learn and see if it would work better, not work the same, that sort of thing. I did not load or skip load for the first run or the first cycle. So the timing here is important to note. The reason that you don't want to load while you're running this fat burner is because of the potential for your core body temperature to get too high. Essentially, your temperature goes too high, you get too hot, and that's where the danger comes in. On top of the fact that everything that, well, not everything that you eat, but a lot of the calories that you eat are essentially going to be ripped through by this compound. So you want to run this compound in a depleted state to take full advantage of the compound. You're not going to be on it very long. Some people only run it for 7 days. In fact, I was recommended by a couple people to only run it 7 days. I decided to run it longer than that, feeling that I could benefit that much more from it. Maybe not twice as much, but still get more out of it than 7 days. I struggled with the fact that 7 days, like, well, how much can I really lose in 7 days? Then I thought 10 days, so I settled on 14. There is no magic amount of days, in my opinion. Some people run it low dose for 30 days. I don't know that I would do that because of the negative impacts that it has on your training, which I will get to in a second. It is also essentially a poison. Okay, you will build those levels in your system, and I think the longer you take it, even at low dose, the better chance that you have of, I don't know if it's necessarily causing damage, but it's just not terribly healthy. Okay, you have a compound in your system that is essentially toxic at higher levels. So you want to use it to get the benefit and then get it out of your system. So the loading schedule here and when I started this 14-day run is important. Because of my skip loading, which typically happens on Sundays, I didn't want to start the compound or the fat burner on that day or the day after because I wanted to not be terribly full and a little bit more depleted. So I waited until midweek and started it on a Wednesday. That gave me a few days to get into my training, deplete glycogen stores a little bit. And because this is during a dieting phase, obviously, I would deplete a little bit quicker than if I were in the off season. I may not deplete that much. Cardio, it certainly helped as well, even though I did not do any cardio during the first run with this fat burner or the first cycle. I did with the second. I'll talk about that in a second, but no cardio for the first run. I did, however, do the cardio on Monday and Tuesday and even Wednesday morning, and then I dosed the first dose of the fat burner at noon on Wednesday after my cardio session. Now, from there, I ran it 14 days. I actually ran it 15. I went Wednesday to Wednesday. The first Sunday and the second Sunday, I did not load. I just stayed with my diet, stayed depleted, and let the fat burner do its work. Come that following Wednesday, after running it for 15 days, I then had Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to start to allow blood levels for the fat burner to decrease. And because it's crystalline powder, the one that I use because it's stronger, it's faster acting. So it not only gives you the benefit when you first start taking it and hits you quicker, but it also clears your bloodstream a little bit quicker as well, as opposed to the regular version that is substantially slower. The half-life is quite long. So that gave me 3 to 4 days before I started the load. I felt pretty good about that time frame and loaded, and everything was great. I didn't have any temperature issues any more than usual. When I skip load with increased calories and carbs, I do have my core temperature go up. I think everybody does, but it was nothing like while being, nothing of what I anticipated of had I loaded while I was using the fat burner. Got into the next week, and that's when, as the week progressed, I was able to start dropping water weight that the fat burner makes you hold. Now, the first run, I didn't seem to hold a lot of water. In fact, I anticipated that I would be kind of waterlogged, kind of soft, and I was much harder and more vascular than I thought that I was going to be. So in finishing up that first cycle of fat burner, I didn't anticipate losing much water weight. And I actually was dropping scale weight during the entire 2-week cycle of being on the fat burner. Much more so the first week than the second, but I still did continue to drop scale weight into that second week. That does not always happen. Some people stay the same while they're on it. You can't really see what the results are a lot of the times until you are done with the cycle, and then you're able to have some time to allow the water to come off, and then you can see the visual changes from the cycle, and you can see and get a more accurate read of what your scale weight is. So anyway, I didn't anticipate dropping a lot of water weight, but I did. I ended up that by the end of that following week, which you have to understand is actually 10 days, because I stopped on a Wednesday. I probably started to lose the water through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but blood levels were still up. And then I loaded on Sunday. So that kind of threw off the water weight, because of course I'm going to gain water weight from the skip load. Had I not loaded, I probably would have seen that water weight drop after only 7 days. So by that following Wednesday. Took a little bit longer because of the skip load. And that's okay, because I was so depleted anyway. After running the fat burner for 2 weeks and not loading, I'm very used to loading. I have loaded for years and years and years, once a week, while dieting. So for me not to do that was, it wasn't difficult, but it was a little difficult on my psyche to continue to stay flat, want to fill out, not fill out. And I think that's my son in the background there coming to get his skateboard and his shoes. But not filling out and remaining flat, just not something I wanted to do. I wanted to load, I wanted to fill out, and then allow that water to drop the following day, or the following week, I'm sorry. The initial loss, once I took into consideration my baseline weight prior to starting the 2-week run of the fat burner, and then allowing that time after for the water to drop, the drop was 12 pounds. I feel incredibly confident that that was almost entirely, if not entirely, all body fat. The visual change was absolutely incredible. I hate to give a compound too much credit because I think that this particular compound is actually what I call the lazy man's fat burner. There are a lot of people who don't have great physiques, who don't get into incredible condition, but love to use this compound because it's so effective because they're freaking lazy. So I kind of was hoping that maybe it wouldn't work that well. Maybe hoping that I had something to offset the good results with something a little less positive. But the truth is, I have not ever, and I've used a lot of shit, I have not ever used a compound that has been that effective, ever. The 12 pounds actually is almost misleading because visually the changes were above and beyond that. It was just incredible. The changes, I would say if I had to put it, I mean, we're talking maybe 6 weeks of dieting crammed into 2. It really was that pronounced and that dramatic. Now, the diet that I use is important because when it comes to this low dosing, to make the low dosing effective, you have to have a higher amount of simple carbohydrates in there to kind of fuel the fat burner. To do that, at least in my particular situation, this is what I did. I was doing cardio prior to this first 2-week cycle. I stopped it for the 2-week run. I was actually concerned about core temperature, things like that, so that's why I stopped. Plus I figured this fat burner is going to have such an impact metabolically that I felt like the cardio would just be a drop in the bucket, like it would almost be wasted time, so I thought, why? And I'm glad that I didn't do it because it gave me a more accurate representation of how much this compound impacted my metabolism. So in cutting the cardio, I essentially, it's the equivalent of adding roughly 300 calories a day from a metabolism standpoint, because I was doing roughly one 30-minute session per day. Combined with that, I actually added about 300 calories in simple carbs from fruit. So now there's a difference or a disparity of roughly 600 calories of an increase per day. Now I used fruit for a couple reasons. Number one, very fast acting, very simple, which is what you need during a run with this fat burner to make it effective at this low dose. But it also, I chose fruits that provided higher antioxidant content. And that's important because this compound has a very strong, the fact that it's relatively toxic, or kind of, I've heard the term poison thrown around. It's important that you're supplementing with antioxidants and supplements that are going to, basically chase down free radicals, that sort of thing. Try to keep you healthy so that this compound doesn't impact you any more negatively while you're running it than it has to. So in doing that, a lot of my fruits, as an example, I use frozen fruit, and I just put it in a big Tupperware tub and kept it in the fridge with a measuring cup in it. That seemed to be the most practical and convenient way to do it. But I would combine pineapple with blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, peaches, mango, that sort of thing. Very watery carbs as well, because it's incredibly important to overhydrate while you're on this compound. Primarily because of the increase in core temperature, which makes hydration that much more important. Not only to help flush out the toxins and the poison, if you will. So I had an increase of roughly 600 calories between cutting the cardio and adding the fruit. And adding the fruit again was over my regular diet. I did not take anything out of my diet to replace or substitute the fruit carbs with. I added them. So with a disparity of 600 calories more, I dropped 12 pounds of body fat in, I can't say 14 days because I'm counting the additional 9 to 10 days afterwards where I needed to drop the water to get a clear indication or a more accurate read of my scale weight and my condition. So I'm going to say over the course of 3 to 3.5 weeks, 12 pounds of what I feel is damn near pure body fat. I consider that a very, very good, very good run. Very dramatic. The second run was quite a bit different. It still worked very well, not as well as the first run for a couple reasons. Number one, I loaded. So I still started, I skip loaded. I still started on a Wednesday, but that following Sunday, I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept thinking to myself, well, the increased temperature that I'm going to get from added calories and carbohydrate will fuel my metabolism even more. All I have to do is keep it controlled so that it's obviously not too high. To do that, I was loading moderate fat, moderate carb. I felt like if I loaded high carb, low fat in the traditional skip loading fashion, that it was possible that my temperature would go too high, it would be uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. So I really struggled between just doing it the same way that I did the first time because it was so effective, and the fact that I need to learn. I have this, this need to experiment, to question even solid and well-respected advice and information that I get. I still need to question it. I'm just too curious. So logically, I felt that the load would be helpful. Part of that reason was because as I got into the second week of the first run, I felt like I had very little, if any, temperature fluctuation. At times, I felt like I wasn't even on the fat burner. So I thought to myself, well, the increase in calories will allow my metabolism to not slow down and my body to not adjust to the compound. Logically, it makes sense. Well, it made sense to me. For people with a lot of experience with the fat burner who insist on not loading, and it's just such a terrible idea, sometimes I think people get locked into there's only one way to do something, and there is not. I understand that there are people who think that there is one way to run this fat burner, and it is that there are black and white rules. You do not load. I know too many people who have loaded on this compound and had very successful runs with it, which was part of the reason that I looked at doing it as well, so that I could see what that impact was, if it was the same, if it was less effective, more effective, that sort of thing. So when I loaded on that Sunday, I got retardedly full. My muscles were splitting skin everywhere. In fact, it was so surprising because I anticipated that the fat burner would not allow that to happen. It would just rip through the calories that I was taking in. And it did not do that. I can say this, I was fuller that day, and I did not change my loading at all. It was a typical skip load like any other weekend. I tend to load moderate fat, moderate carb anyway. I don't load traditionally high carb, low fat anymore. The reason for that primarily, without getting into it too deep, is in 2012 when I was getting ready for a show, I had a little bit of issues with hyperglycemia. So I started adding the fat in at that time. Now, I do start my first meal, typically high carb, low fat, with the supercompensation glycogen storage compound, aka insulin. But from there, after that initial meal, it's more moderate fat, moderate carb. As an example, gourmet breakfast, to where, gourmet pancakes, French toast, things like that. So they're high carb, they're relatively high carb, but that's balanced with a higher fat content too. Now, I'm not eating bacon and sausage, but that's where I get the moderate carb, moderate fat label, if you will. That helps me to not have ridiculously high blood sugar levels. I may be able to go back to that high carb, low fat, because it's been 5 years since I had that issue. And in fact, that's the only time that I ever had that issue, was in 2012 anyway. What I found was my progress was equally as good, if not slightly better, with the moderate fat, moderate carb approach, so I just stayed with it. Now, I load on this Sunday, I get ridiculously full, I look retarded, but on Monday, I'm a puffer fish. And it should be noted too, that during the loading, each meal, I didn't have any spikes in body temperature. If my body temperature went up, it was insignificant, relatively innocuous, because I just didn't notice it. And some people, could say, well, you didn't take your temperature, you didn't get, that's true. I've been doing this a long time. I've dealt with core temperature issues based on skip loading, dieting, things like that for a very long time. There was no significant increase in temperature, and I didn't need a thermometer to tell me that. So, I found that actually kind of surprising, to be honest with you. Anyway, I get into the next day. I am a puffer fish. I am holding so much water that I'm a little bit anxious, because I'm thinking, I know my blood pressure is through the roof. I don't feel very good. I'm breathing heavier. This doesn't feel too terribly awesome. So I'm forcing water because I have to train Monday night, and I don't want to, have any issues. Well, I'd like to try to push some of this water off before I get to the gym, and that's not working. It was more difficult to train. I actually was warmer training than I typically am. I wear a stocking hat a lot of the time to train in. It's just something I do. You can pick it apart if you want. You can talk about it on social media. You can judge me as being a loser because I carry a half gallon of water around in the gym and I wear a stocking hat. Whatever you want to do is fine. But I had to take the stocking hat off because I was so warm. I wasn't warm to the point where I thought, oh shit, I'm in a bad spot, but I was just warm, and I was sweating like I was holding a ton of water, because I was. Normally, in a situation like that, if I hold a lot of water off of a load, it's gone in a couple days. Even after 5 or 6 days coming into that next weekend, I had not moved all the water. And I just generally did not feel very good. So I decided at that point, I could run this fat burner for another 4 or 5 days to get to the 14-day mark, but I just don't like how I feel on it. I felt at that point, I'm like, gosh, and I made a mistake with the loading. Clearly this is from the load, because that's what it looked like. And it ended up being, but not entirely from the load, which I'll explain here in just a second. So I decided on that Saturday, I told my wife that I was going to stop it a few days early, that I just didn't like how I felt on it. I didn't feel that if I stayed on it and skipped the load, that I was going to lose much more water anyway. I felt like I needed to get off the compound to get the water off. So I did stop it on Saturday. I decided to load on Sunday, but what I did this time was, I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to force water during the load. Normally I don't do that. I take in water and I make sure that I'm not dehydrated, but I tend to err on the side of taking up space in my stomach with food before fluid. Figuring, yeah, I can get fluid later, and if worse comes to worse, I'm holding a little bit of water tomorrow because I didn't get enough today. I'll up my water, it'll flush through, it'll only take, 6-8 hours, and the water will start falling off. No big deal. I've done this for quite a while. I know how I'm going to react the large majority of the time. So I decided to push water on that Sunday for the skip load. I started with a couple liters in the morning, not necessarily forcing it, but a couple liters over an hour, hour and a half while I was having my coffee. And then before my first meal, I got another liter. So I already had 3 liters in me before I even had my first meal. What I did was I only ate 3 meals that day. And I ate them about 6 hours apart, 5 to 6 hours roughly. They were bigger meals. I was full. I wasn't miserable, but I was definitely full when I was done with them. Then I would wait 2 or 3 hours, and I would make sure that I got another liter, maybe a liter an hour, so that I got a couple liters again before the next meal. And I did that all day. Even when I got up that night, when I was sleeping on that Sunday night into Monday morning, I made sure that I got a liter a couple times. If I had to get up to pee, that sort of thing. The water was starting to go through me. I seemed to not be holding as much. By Monday, I had flushed almost all of that water off. I looked ridiculous. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out how in the hell I could have loaded just like I did the week prior and had completely different results. And the answer was quite obvious. Well, it was obvious right then. It wasn't obvious the week before. It was my water intake. So I made a pretty big mistake in the sense that I knew that I needed to take in more fluid while on the compound, on the fat burner. What happened was in combining the fat burner with the skip load, I didn't get enough fluid. I wasn't even close. And that's what made me retain a massive amount of water. When I had upped it after that first load, it wasn't high enough. And that's why it wasn't flushing out the water that I was holding. You have to understand that on this compound, it also messes your electrolytes up bad. You need to supplement all of your electrolytes on top of keeping your water intake high. My water intake was fine if I was not on the compound, but it was not high enough to not only be on the compound, but then to skip load on top of that because of the demands for fluid at that point with those two things together. So I was glad that I cut the second run to only 10 days, and I learned a lot because at first I thought that I just can't load on this. I don't know that I would load the next time I run it, but I do know that it wasn't the load that caused the problem. It was that my fluid intake was not high enough. So the results of the second run, after I was able to get off the compound and give it another week, I only had to give it a week because I loaded the day after I came off the compound instead of coming off of it on a Wednesday like I did the first time. So I lost, by the time everything had shifted, the water had shifted, scale weight was almost exactly 8 pounds. Now you have 8 pounds versus 12 pounds. And you have a difference of 10 days and 14 days. And you have a difference of loading and not loading. The other thing that I did not note that I need to is I did keep cardio in for the second run. Only one session a day of 30 minutes. I thought that it might be difficult to do that with heat, being exhausted. It actually wasn't very difficult at all. So what I have here is this. The first run, 14 days, down 12 pounds, no cardio, increased calories, no loading. Second run, only 10 days, but I did load, did cardio once a day, still had fruit, but not as much fruit as I had the first run. And the reason for that was simply because I was further into my prep at that point. I wanted to drop a little bit of calories, see if maybe it helped, didn't help, that sort of thing. And I was down 8 pounds a second. Yes, I lost more the first time, but when you take into consideration, I think the only thing that stands out is I did cardio the second time and lost less weight. Yet at the same time, there were only 4 to maybe 5 weeks in between these 2 runs for the fat burner, which is not recommended. It's actually too close. I've actually since then heard from quite a few people that it's probably better to only run this compound 1 time during a prep, and that's out of the gate. To get the prep going, get a quick kind of surge of progress, peel off a bunch of body fat when your metabolism is running the strongest, and then go into prep mode after that without this fat burner. I don't know if that is, I don't know if that's the correct way, that only doing it 1 time is the best move, because I still got really good progress from the second run. Do I think I'll run it again before any of my shows? Probably not. I feel that the progress was so good with the 2. I mean, that's a combination of 20 pounds. If I can't, and I'm in excellent condition right now at 8, 10, and 12 weeks out from the 3 shows that I have on the radar. I don't feel I need it, for one. My condition is that good at this point that I don't feel that I need it. So I probably won't run it. If I did, I would probably run it for 7 days. I would not load. And I probably would cut my cardio as well and just see what I could get out of it. But as I sit here, I am leaning much further away from using it than using it. Things are going so well, I'm on track. I'm actually ahead of schedule. So I see no real reason to add that compound in. Plus, and this is important to note, it does take a hit on your training. You just don't have the contractile force and the strength that you normally do. What I found in my situation was both times, the first, when I started it on a Wednesday, I still had to train through Friday, and I would feel it the first day. I mean, if I had to train on Wednesday and I took it Wednesday morning, I felt it on my Wednesday night session. That first Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, those first few workouts, while blood levels are building, impacted my strength and my workouts a little bit. By the next week, though, I didn't really notice it. A lot of people kick back on the intensity and kick back on the amount of weight that they're putting up while they're on this compound. I may have cut the weights just a little bit, but I didn't cut my volume and I did not cut my intensity. I trained just as hard while I was on it as I did when I'm not on it. And I didn't feel that it was a struggle to do that. I have heard that a couple people have had injuries, ruptured tendons, that sort of thing. I don't know if there's a connection or not, or if it was just an odd coincidence because there are ruptured tendons in this industry, that they just happened to be on this compound at the same time. I don't know. I know myself, I did not have any problems while I was on it. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the heat was a little bit more for the second run when I was loading, or after I had loaded, when I was in the gym the following week. But it was nothing that was not tolerable. It was take off your hat and train in a tank top instead of a sweatshirt. Big deal. So, I don't think I'm missing anything other than the supplements, and the supplements are important, so I want to run those down real quick. Obviously, I noted that water needs to be high, and when I say high, if you're running 2.5, you need to be running another gallon on top of that while you're on. You can obviously take in too much water even while you're on. It's called hyponatremia. It could be hypokalemia. It's vitally important that when you increase the water, you have to increase your electrolyte supplementation. That means calcium, magnesium, potassium, and you need to make sure that you have enough sodium as well. Now, ballpark numbers, I would take 500 milligrams of magnesium a couple times, twice a day basically. Potassium, I would take 3 times a day. Calcium I don't normally take, and I took that twice a day. Roughly 1,200 milligrams twice a day. Sodium I made sure, which I typically do anyway, but I salt all my food. I made sure that I had a little bit extra. I would throw in some dill pickles, especially when I was done training. Some people use taurine. I didn't see the need for that because I don't see that this compound depletes taurine, but I could be wrong. I know that I did not have any cramping issues at all at any point and did not use taurine. Taurine is something that is typically used when you use clenbuterol because of the depleting properties of clenbuterol to the point where you can cramp terribly, terribly bad. Taurine offsets that in the area of 3 to 4, typically 3 to 4 grams a day, a gram 3 to 4 times a day. Another couple important supplements, vitamin E for its antioxidant effects at roughly 1,200 a day. But glutathione is important because with this fat burner, one of the major concerns that people have in using it is there is a pretty strong connection to people getting cataracts who use this compound. And it's not necessarily from abusing it for years and years and years. There are cases where people have used it once or twice, not even necessarily high dose, and they end up with cataracts. This is especially common in older people and primarily older women because Mrs. Skip insisted on using the compound and actually reacted very, very well to it, that she was supplementing with glutathione. Now, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm not an expert with this compound. I'm not an expert with glutathione or antioxidants for that matter. I don't know them like the back of my hand. I have heard that the oral version of glutathione does not yield much in the way of blood levels. I respect the opinion of the person that said that, so I would anticipate that there's truth to that. However, I have no idea how to get injectable glutathione. I don't know that that's terribly practical or what. My initial response or advice would be to, I don't want to say overdose, but increase the oral dosing of your oral glutathione 3 to 4 times over what is recommended. And what's recommended is roughly 1,000 milligrams a day. The problem with oral glutathione is it is expensive. $30 to $35 a bottle at your typical GNC for 60 capsules of 500 milligrams. It's not a cheap compound. Now, it is GNC and I get that. You can probably find the compound cheaper online. You can buy it in bulk and save money, but I would definitely look into that. Glutathione might be the most important supplement, especially if you're older, to take while you're using this compound, this fat-burning compound. The only other thing that I would add is V8 juice is a very simple, easy way to get added potassium. However, it does add calories. I would say that if you have an already quick metabolism, probably not a big deal. I don't have a terribly fast metabolism. I don't know that I want to dig into it by drinking, 3 8-ounce glasses of, V8 juice a day when I can take potassium supplements with no calories. But that's just me. Certainly something to consider because there are other electrolytes in the V8 juice, which can be beneficial. So I just throw it out there. I used it the first run, but I did not use it the second run. Didn't notice much of a difference outside of my water problems that I don't think were related to my not drinking V8 juice. that is my, those are my thoughts on this fat burner compound. Again, I'm not advocating or condoning the use as much as I'm giving you my experience based on only running it twice. I have had clients who have ran it, very similar fashion, very similar results. At the same time, I've had a few clients who have had to actually cut the carbohydrate, cut the fruit, and when they did that, they started responding even better. Keep in mind, everybody is different, and there are going to be there are going to be variables that need to be changed for the individual, whether it's a regular diet, whether it's hormone use, whether it's your cardio, and in this particular case, how you respond to this fat burner. So even though I have given you this basic outline of what I have done, if you are contemplating or thinking about using this compound, take the information that I have provided, sift through it, do your research, structure your plan, and do it, erring on the side of caution. Get the results the first time, and then do something similar to what I did. And if you run it again after that, then you can start to tweak things a little bit. You can start to play around with your diet a little bit, and you'll have a reference point to compare it to decide whether it was effective, as effective, less effective, etc.